Hello viewers, welcome to our first full content video here on Bayt al-Asad, House of the Lion. And today we're going to focus on a weapon that's been receiving a lot of attention as of late on different YouTube channels, museums. I've seen it pop up in a lot of private collections. And that is this, the Katar, or you might otherwise known as the Indian push dagger. Now, a lot of the videos on YouTube have focused on the feasibility and the practicality of the use of this weapon. Scholargram, I want to commend for doing an amazing job talking about the mechanics of this weapon. Such as punching with it, and cutting with this as well, and overall the practicality of the dagger. And we can also agree that the closed grip here on the crossbar of this weapon allows for incredibly good skeletal alignment, right? Everything, it's in line with a thrusting or punching motion, right? You don't have to worry about really doing much with your body to make sure this is going into the squishy bits of your opponent. We've come to the conclusion that your cuts are going to be very good at diagonals, very, very good at horizontals. You can do some ascendings, right? It's pretty good overall for your basic cuts and thrusts. And these are really good points and observations. But what do the historical sources say? And how can the context of society and martial situations better help us understand how these weapons were used, for specifically now in my study with the Mughal India? And that's what we're going to check out today on this channel. All right, so before we go on, first and foremost, I just want to address that I'm not Indian, right? I am not anywhere near an expert on the use of these weapons. I'm aware of the existence of other Indian martial arts schools that are of living tradition. And I'm sure that these have roots in the historical use. They don't really address what I'm looking for today, and that is what the sources say about how this weapon is used. So this is not to disrespect or discredit how they demonstrate the use of the Katar, but rather to provide another outlook or insight. I also want to be understood that while a lot of the people who teach and use Katars today are Sikh or another derivative of the Sikh religion, this observation today is looking at the use of the Katar during the Mughal period and what's shown in their manuscripts and illustrations. So the first thing we have to understand is that these weapons, these Katars, were both functional and a sign of wealth, right? Power and status. Katars appeared as we first know them, in this form during the 16th century. I know there's some evidence that they appeared in different forms earlier than that, but we're looking straight at the one that I have just like this. And that was right as the Mughal Empire was beginning to kind of take power in their region. And from here on out, Mughal and even eventual Rajput royalty would use these things, right, to hunt down lions and crocodiles. And this would be, showing a very, very grand display of their skills and prowess. And the proof of this status was reinforced with many, many portraits of Indian royalty that would not be complete without a Katar tucked into their sash, just like this. And they're often foregoing swords in their place. We're so used to seeing swords as a sign of royalty, maybe even in portraits, but in this case, it's actually just the Katar. Additionally, royal and notable figures were continually included in Mughal miniatures with their trusty Katars on their sash. So now what about the applied use of the Katar and any pictorial evidence? So to address this, To my knowledge, there's no translated manuals or manuscripts on how these weapons were supposed to be used or even taught to be used. Right? You have European fighting manuscripts. We have some Persian fighting manuscripts. Some North African ones that talk about, training people to use these weapons. As far as I know, that doesn't exist. And I cannot read or speak the language these manuscripts were written in. So I couldn't translate them even if I had them. I'm just working off of what I see from pictures and other accounts. But it's my theory that they're not really intended to be used outside of the battlefield, but really only in an armored combat scenario. Right? Well, yes, these daggers could obviously, be drawn out of self-defense. The daily life of Prince of Nobility. You're there, you're walking down the street, you have it on you. Someone tries to attack you, it's there, you're ready. You're ready to go. You can do it. But to me, the pictorial evidence shows us that they're intended for much more of a specialized, militaristic role. Right? There are a plethora of miniature paintings that show armored fighters going into battle with the Katar on their side, but also a plethora of other weapons ready to be used. And they are adorned pretty heavily in some kind of armor. So in fact, there's actually one miniature that I did find that shows two very heavily armored warriors on horseback. One which has extended his arm with a Katar in hand to attempt to thrust to his opponent's stomach. His opponent has then blocked the Katar and is then trying to thrust him in the back with a dagger. And I thought this was very, very telling about its use on the battlefield in armor. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up on the screen. As discussed before, these daggers are most effective at thrusting or in a punching motion, which tells me they weren't really generally drawn unless you had an armored opponent. Again, it could have been drawn on someone unarmored in any situation, but armored opponents, it'd be much better to use these to either pierce through chain armor or exploit the openings of the armor on your opponent. And quite similar to a khanjar or a card or a rondel in the European traditions. And the weapon's very, very suited for it, you can thrust into a variety of angles with this if you need to. You can go straight forward to the throat either way you need to. You can come up under the armpits, go down to the groin. You also have the rails here on the forearm, which a lot of people have talked about how these can be used to parry. I think it might make just as much sense that you can also use them, to protect your hand from getting caught against the metal of someone else's armor, or maybe if someone else tries to block your thrusts with their weapon, you've got more protection, right? But it's also going to serve its purpose, just generally speaking, to get in there and exploit the gaps in armor. So overall, this is just the very beginning of my look at the use of these weapons in the context of a situation that they're very well suited for, and the ones the pictorial evidence backs up. My next step will be to engage in a bit of what we call experimental archaeology to see how effective those weapons are in both armored and unarmored contexts to back up my ideas. So I'll be throwing on some fencing masks, getting some padding, getting on my chain, and just kind of seeing how these things play out in a sparring match with someone else. And I'm really hoping that some kind of manuscript on the use of these weapons and others in India does come forward one day, because they're fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes. So I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to anything you want to leave down in the comments, and I will see you next time on Bayt al-Asad, the House of the Lion.